I did not expect to cry when I saw my city burning. Queens are not supposed to cry. That is something they tell you when you are young, when the crown is still too heavy for your head, and the robes drag on the floor behind you. They say, a queen feels everything, but shows nothing. She is the calm in the storm. She is the eye of the fire. So when my shuttle broke through the clouds above Solvarath, and I saw the Eastern District swallowed in orange-white flame, I did not cry. I held my breath instead, and I gripped the armrest so tightly that one of my aides quietly reached over and touched my hand. I had been away for 11 days, a summit on the far side of the Vitharan system, trade agreements, boundary negotiations, the usual careful dance of politics that fills a queen's calendar and empties her patience. My people had managed fine without me, as they always do. The city runs on its own rhythms. My role, most days, is symbolic. A face, a voice, a seal on a document. I was not supposed to be needed. The shuttle descent felt like it lasted a lifetime. My communication officer, a careful young male named Dren, was pulling every signal he could from the surface. Most of them were fragmented, emergency tones. The automated voice of the city's disaster grid, cycling through evacuation routes in a flat, mechanical tone that was somehow more frightening than screaming. Dren kept his expression neutral, but I saw his secondary eyes twitching at the corners, which is what our kind does when we are afraid, and trying very hard not to show it. The plasma core in Subdistrict 7 experienced a structural failure, he told me, reading from his screen. Approximately 4 hours ago, the Eastern Nursery Academies were in morning session. He did not need to say more. I already knew what that meant. The nursery academies sit in the Eastern Quarter by design. Old design, from a time when that part of the city was quiet and green, and far from the industrial pulse of the center. My own children had attended those academies when they were small. I knew the layout of those buildings the way you know the layout of your own home. Wide courtyards, tall windows, shallow steps so the smallest ones do not trip. I had walked those steps myself, holding small hands, watching small faces tilt up toward the light. I told my pilot to land 3 blocks from the fire line. She argued. I told her again. We landed. The street outside the shuttle was a strange kind of quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the quiet of a place that has been emptied too fast, where the ordinary sounds of life, voices, transport hum, market noise, have been cut away all at once and left a silence that feels wrong in the body. Doors stood open. A market cart had been abandoned mid-street, its goods still arranged neatly, as if the seller had simply stepped away for a moment. A child's small bag lay on the pavement near a fountain, its clasp still done up. I walked toward the fire line. My security team came with me, though 2 of them were visibly struggling. Our species has an old, deep fear of plasma fire. It goes back to the early centuries of our world, when plasma storms would roll across the open plains, and there was nothing to do but run. That fear is written into our bodies. Standing near plasma flame, even shielded, produces a physical response, a tightening in the chest, a pulling back of the limbs, a very strong message from somewhere deep in the mind that says, this is wrong, go the other way. I felt it too. I kept walking anyway. The emergency cordon was established 2 streets back from the worst of the flame. Solvhari fire response teams were staged there. Good people, well-trained, wearing their full thermal gear. They were waiting. I asked the incident commander why no one had gone in. He explained the authorization process with the steady voice of someone who has recited a procedure many times. 7 stages: environmental assessment, risk modeling, team certification, command approval, secondary command approval, resource allocation, deployment order. It sounded very thorough. It sounded like something designed for a different kind of emergency, a slower one that would wait politely while the paperwork was completed. I was about to ask how long the authorization had been running when one of my aides grabbed my arm. Your Majesty, there, inside the flame zone. I looked. Something was moving in the smoke. Something upright, 2-limbed, bulky with armor. It was moving slowly, but with complete purpose. Not the stumbling motion of someone lost, but the deliberate step-by-step movement of someone who knows exactly where they are going and is simply choosing to go there, despite every signal in the environment telling them not to. It was a human. I knew this because I had met the Terran ambassador twice and had seen other humans at the summit. I recognized the basic shape, the 2 limbs, the single pair of eyes, the lack of our own lateral symmetry. What I did not recognize was the suit. My aide identified it quickly. Terran Urban Search and Rescue Armor, personal grade, rated to temperatures that our own emergency team's gear could not match. It was a practical suit, functional rather than impressive, covered in small tools and pouches. It looked worn, like something that had been used many times before. The human was pulling at a collapsed wall panel with both hands. Not a machine, not a tool. Her hands. She got the panel free. Beneath it was a shelter hatch. She pulled the hatch. She reached in. And she came out with 3 young Salfhari, small, frightened, clinging to her arms. And she carried them to the edge of the fire zone where a relay drone waited, set the children down with what looked like extraordinary gentleness, made sure they were stable, and turned back toward the fire. I stood very still. My aide said something. I did not hear it. The human went back in. I moved to the relay point. When she came out the second time, she had 2 more children and 1 adult who was too frightened to walk on her own. The human was supporting the adult with 1 arm and holding both children against her chest with the other. Her visor was dark with soot. Her left shoulder plate had a small warning light blinking on it that I did not know how to read, but that did not look good. She set them down. She looked at me. Her translator device was on her collar, and it worked with a small delay, so her words arrived just after her mouth stopped moving. "Your Majesty," she said, "I need your help. I can find them. I can carry them, but they're too frightened to follow my voice. They don't know me." She paused. "They know yours." I had no answer to that. There was nothing to argue with. It was simply true. I activated the city's emergency broadcast band from my personal communicator, and I began to speak. I spoke the way I used to speak to my own children when they were small and frightened. Steady, warm, close. I told them who I was. I told them that someone was coming for them. I told them to make noise, any noise, so they could be found. I told them they were not alone. The human listened for a moment, nodded once, and went back in. I am not sure how long we worked like that. It felt both very short and very long, the way time moves when your full attention is fixed on something that matters completely. She went in. She came out. I spoke, and the children moved toward the sound of my voice, which gave her a direction. The emergency teams, once they finally received their deployment authorization, began working the outer sections. We were working the deepest part, the part that had been hardest to reach. I learned her name during one of the intervals when she was waiting for a partial collapse to settle before going back through. Sergeant Mara Osei, formerly of the Terran Urban Search and Rescue Corps. The formerly surprised me. I asked why she was here, in an alien city, in a disaster that had nothing to do with her. She was detaching a damaged coolant line from a door seal with a small tool, working quickly and without looking up. She said, "I heard the kids. I had the suit. What else would I do?" I thought about that answer for a long time afterward. I am still thinking about it. The second rupture came without warning. A deep sound, more felt than heard, and then a wave of heat that pushed everyone at the perimeter back 2 steps by pure instinct. My security team pulled at me. I held my position because I was the broadcast signal, and if I moved too far, the children inside would lose it. And Mara was still inside. She had 2 hatchlings, and she was trapped behind a collapsed section of the main corridor arch. I will not pretend what I did next was brave, in any organized sense. I took a coolant mask from a nearby drone kit. It was designed for our atmosphere and our temperature tolerance, which is meaningfully lower than what she had been walking through, and I went to the arch. Just the arch. Just that far. I could feel the heat through the mask immediately. A pressing, insistent heat that the suit was not really built to handle. Together we moved the arch. She handed me the children. We walked out. When we cleared the fire line, her shoulder seal gave out. She sat down in the street. The first thing she did, before checking her own arm, before removing her visor, before doing anything else, was look at the 2 children and make sure they were unhurt. She checked them carefully, the way someone does when they are not performing care but simply doing it. Then, satisfied, she looked at her arm. It was not a serious injury. It would heal. The final count, once everything was confirmed, was 23 Salfhari, rescued by Sergeant Mara Osei. The official emergency response, once fully deployed, recovered 11 more. I recovered 2, the children at the arch, who I am not certain I could have carried out alone if she had not been there to hand them to me. 3 cycles later, I stood before the High Council, and I gave a speech. I did not talk about the fire. I talked about what the fire had shown me, which is different. I told them that I had spent many years studying diplomacy, the careful management of relationships between peoples, the slow building of trust, the measured exchange of words and agreements and guarantees. I told them that none of it had prepared me for what a human sergeant with a worn rescue suit and no authorization from anyone had done in a burning city because she heard children and had the means to help them. I told them that our emergency systems are good. I believe that. But they are built on a model that assumes the people inside the system will always be the ones doing the helping, that the structure itself is the engine of response. What I had seen was something outside that model entirely, a single person who carried her own engine inside her, always running, needing nothing to start it except the sound of someone who needed help. I proposed a new treaty, not for trade, not for shared defense. A mutual survival compact. Human rescue personnel embedded in every Salvhari city's emergency infrastructure, trained alongside our teams, reachable quickly, ready. One of the senior council members asked the obvious question: what do the humans want in return? I had already asked Mara directly, through the ambassador, 3 days earlier. She had answered without pausing to think about it. I read her exact words to the council from my notes. She said, "Nothing. Just call us when it's bad." The council chamber was quiet for a long moment after that. I have thought many times about what I saw in those hours. I have tried to put a name to it. We have words for courage in my language, formal words, ceremonial words, words that belong to soldiers and to history. We have words for duty and for sacrifice. But those words all carry with them the weight of decision, of a moment where a being chooses to act despite their fear. They assume the fear comes first. They assume the calculation. What I saw in Mara was something that came before the calculation, something that did not wait for fear to arrive and then push past it. Something that simply moved, the way a river moves. Not because it decided to move, but because moving is what it is. I do not have a word for that in my language. I am told the humans do not have one either. They simply have the act. I came home to a burning kingdom, and I was too late to stop the burning. I will carry that. But I landed in a city where a stranger had already decided, without being asked, without any promise of recognition, without a single stage of authorization from anyone, that my children were worth every step she took into that fire. There is no treaty language for that. There is no diplomatic term. There is only what it was. One person, walking toward the worst thing, because the worst thing was where the children were. I think about her every time I walk the steps of the Eastern academies, which have been rebuilt now, with new windows and new courtyards, and the same shallow steps so the smallest ones do not trip. I think about the worn suit and the small warning light on the shoulder plate, and the way she sat down in the street and checked the children before she checked herself. I think, somewhere in this universe, there is a species that made that into a habit, and I am very glad they found us first.